Peter Inker and I are going to jointly give the closing talk at this amazing conference. We're doing it as the conference has happened. Peter is in America and I am in Exeter. And as one of the hosts originally of the plans for this conference, I'd just like to say that it is a celebration of all things experimental and the work of EXARC, and that this format has been both a challenge and also opened up so many new opportunities. So the two of us are going to be talking, and we will cover a lot of the things that we've talked about in conversations that we've been running throughout the live conference. So I'll just start off by saying this is a celebration of 20 years of our experimental archaeology master's programme. And it has become rather different, but it's also totally memorable. We've both talked about the need to do things differently in a world where there is climate to think about, but we've also seen so many things that can happen in this way. We will be saying more about that, but I just want to start off by giving some broad overviews. So EXARC has 4 legs: ancient technology, experimental archaeology, interpretation, education, and museum practice. All of these things have been featured in this conference, and there are 133 papers. More than 1,300 have registered for the conference from 72 countries. Most of those are based in Europe and North America, but absolutely there are growing numbers from India, Brazil. There are people from South America, Saudi Arabia, Turkey, from Chile to China, Ghana to Russia, Tanzania to Norway, Japan to Canada, Israel to Argentina, and there's a set of reference points of the globe that you don't often get to utter. On the average of the days to date, it's been about 7,500 views per day on the presentations, which is an amazing achievement. And one of the things that Inka and I have been talking about is just how much a conference like this is going to result in different ways of doing things. So with this in mind, do online conferences have a longer tail? Normally a conference, you have a sort of big bang when you get everybody together, and then it has echoes. But this one could have an echo that just resonates for a very long time, in a way perhaps that a conference face-to-face will not. It will be very interesting to see in the coming weeks, months, and even years what happens to the material put together for this conference, which is an astonishing amount of detail, variation, common themes, setting an agenda for what comes next. So on that note, I'm going to pass over to Peter now to do his introduction on some of the themes that he would like to raise.
Well, thank you, Linda. I think you did an excellent summary there of the conference. It really is a spectacular conference. I think we were all coming into this not knowing how it was going to end, but ultimately I think it has really been a playground almost for ideas. That the amount of papers that we are able to hear over the course of past couple of days has been astounding, and the fact that we can actually revisit these papers as well is one factor, as you say, that's going to have a longevity here that maybe at a normal face-to-face conference you'd not be able to get to hear all the papers you wanted to, but here we can go back, we can watch them again, and really keep those papers live in our everyday research and work that we're doing. So I just also wanted to call out the Discord channel, which has also been jumping with people talking. We've got over 12 Discord channels with special interest groups from agriculture, art, brewing, carpentry, food, glass, lithics, metals, mortuary practices, pottery, pyrotechnic, and textiles and bones. So a great place there for people to contact and chat. So again, I think really speaks to the connectedness of people. 72 countries from every continent. That's really impressive. And again, I'm not sure that's something you see even the biggest conferences, that they actually get that kind of coverage. For me, there's a couple of areas that were really important to me. Obviously, there's the kind of practical nature of experimental archaeology, that showing that both machine and physical practical experiments both work together and complement each other. But I think there's also some themes on social responsibility and learning and pedagogy that have been useful. And also, for my particular area, I'm really interested in the kind of sensory aspects of some of the papers that have come out. So we can kind of begin those conversations as we proceed. So how do you want to go forward, Linda?
We've set some themes down, and I think we can revisit some of those themes. Perhaps just start off really by saying, in this rolling time zone, roller coaster of a time zones, really, we started off very much in the UK with Pascal Barnes and Richard Osgood, and we went to the keynote with Elaine Schatzman, and those picked up themes of new ways of doing a conference, meeting UN sustainability goals, and flagging some of the future benefits and current benefits of EXARC membership. And as we go forward, Richard Osgood's talk at the opening on really mental well-being and mental health and the way in which practical engagement can help with that, I think that's something that several other papers have picked up. And the crossovers that are so evident from Elaine Schatzman's keynote paper, where there's mutual benefits between archaeology and forensics, and also a sense that you can do experiments and then test your methods. She mentioned checks for cadaver dogs so that you could test how well they were spotting bodies. So aroma testing, to pick up on your point about sensory experiences, in perhaps not quite the way we'd intended to initially. I also think it's a moment in time when this year past has seen the death of Professor John Coles, who wrote still some of the key works in this topic. And we kicked off the conference presentations as a whole with the hour sponsored by the Prehistoric Society in his memory. And because of John's interests and the kinds of ways he wanted to use this kind of agenda to help more junior early career researchers and scholars, we had wonderful papers from Olga Palacios, Lauren Pitchford, and Johnny Crockett, just setting a standard. And those people and many others at the conference I've seen present papers for the first time. And EXARC has proved to be a really excellent forum and a very welcoming, supportive forum for doing exactly that. And I think that's something that I really want to commend them for. People have talked about how well organized it's been. There have been people in the background working absolute wizard magic on all of the technology. And I think the technology itself, as you've just said, Peter, we've got the 3D modeling, we've got some of those high-tech approaches to try and get around some of the present day problems of not being able to meet and travel in the way that we might otherwise have done. So there are many different ways we can take it from here, but I'll just hand over to you again to see whether there's anything else now that you want to pick up on and roll forward with.
Yeah, I think you calling out Osgood's paper there with wounded warrior rehabilitation is a really important one because it's about relevance, right? The EXARC conference here, I think, has shown how relevant experimenting with ancient technologies and experimenting with behaviors can be made extremely relevant to the current world, as it were. So thinking of sustainability through ancient technologies, how working with ancient technologies can develop sustainable tools for developing today. So it's Ruiza's paper on that. I also liked Lara Comis's paper on the ethics, because we also, not only are we being relevant in terms of the conclusions that we can make from the experiments, we also have to be relevant in terms of placing those within an ethical and moral framework of the modern world. And that goes to that point that you made earlier about the sustainability. How do the research that we do as archaeologists, how can that play into sustainability on a broader, wide-ranging goal? And that, again, speaks to this whole concept of everyone coming from across the world and talking about these different projects they've been working in different areas of the world, and then how that interplay can benefit us all.
Yes, absolutely. The interplay in particular, I find myself picking out themes, and like you, I had ones that touched on the modern world. And I think there is a real development here, and it's a pattern that we can really pick up. And as always, EXARC has got plans in hand to do just that. So next year's conference is actually going to be looking at sustainability issues based in Butser, but there will be a way to really pick up some of those really important points. I'd also mention Bill Schindler's paper on modern nutrition and looking at different ways of dealing with the problems in our food and supply chains, and some of the ways in which people like Naomi Sykes and Sean Doherty have been dealing with animals and just using, if you like, invaded species to open up debates about alien versus native in the modern world, and also just show that what we take for granted, sometimes if you pick it apart, it really doesn't have that long roots. And actually, there's quite a lot to be said for just rethinking some things that we might have thought unthinkable. My own feelings on craft are that there is a privileging in, certainly in a lot of the Western world, of intellectual work above work with the hands. And I just think that is so wrong. You do not leave your head behind when you work with your hands. You actually, I think, do your best work when you put them both together. And so one of the things that I think hasn't been mentioned as a theme, but is one of the themes that I really want to address here, is the idea that working with craftspeople and traditional crafts that are often dwindling or are being resurrected is a really key part of saving those crafts and the intimate knowledge of the environment for the future, and possibly giving the people who are trying to keep those crafts alive a better way of earning a living in the modern world to do so. Because a little bit like we save various species because we recognize that once they're gone is a loss to everybody on the planet. I feel like that's the case with some of the craft work and the way in which it connects people with very local, suitable wood, building traditions, plant management, animals. So both for exploitation for food and also exploitation for crafts, I feel like there's a whole sustainability agenda and a way of marshalling the resources of EXARC to really take that agenda forward in the modern world as well.
Absolutely. And I think that hands-on craft experience is also really important in the teaching arena, right? We saw some interesting papers, one from Hotchkiss, another one from Nikolai, and another one from Panacek, who all of whom using those real-world craft experiences as teaching moments where you can develop that contact with the general public, because it's fine having an academic arena, but moving out beyond that, making ourselves relevant, as you say, to working practical tradesmen and women, but also then more broadly to the general public who can get access to this and understand the past and understand why we do things in the past. This goes back to Osgood's Wounded Warrior rehabilitation too, that actually getting them involved and handling objects, working with objects, manufacturing and creating, enables them to kind of develop their own personal skills and an understanding of archaeology, but then more broadly, as you say, to kind of more sustainable practices going forward. It's interesting, Schindler was on my list too. Obviously, the practical experience, we've spoken in the past, Bill and I, about how, again, really relevant what he's doing there in terms of understanding our food sources and the appropriateness of ways of processing food. And that kind of also speaks to an area that I'm particularly interested in, which is the sensory nature of the past, and can we develop a notion of what the sensory environment was for people in the past. So his paper also, touched on the taste aspects of the past, as did Stoll's paper on cheese making and Verberg's paper on beer, and another one by Mariani on Iron Age drink.
Really, and let's not forget the paper on cider as well, because that often gets forgotten. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, I think that's the key point of the paper, right? So really getting to that sensory taste experience, as it were. I also was excited by a couple of papers that really kind of spoke with vision. So Pitchford was looking at lighting levels in caves, which I think was fascinating, using 3D virtual renders there. and then Unhammer's paper on 4D recording strategies, which again have a direct relevance and application to archaeology going forward, archaeological recording, and the replication of experimentation.
Needham also talked about light and the way in which that played out on some of the things that he was discussing. And as part of light, I find there's so many papers now that are addressing colour, and sometimes the transformation of colour by fire, which I found very interesting. There was quartz changed by fire, ochres can be changed by fire as well. And there was also the shells, the ostrich egg shells,
Exactly.
going those rainbow colours.
Yeah, it's fascinating that we're beginning to engage with the experiential nature of, through experimental archaeology, the experiential nature of the time component of an event like manufacturing or building or producing something. So I really enjoyed those papers, absolutely. Another one that stood out for me was the Romeo Pitone's paper on the acoustic soundscapes. Again, using computers in a new way to both reconstruct, so there's an illustrative component to it, but then also then to work with that to understand what variations in the structures would do to the way sound was bounced around and used in the period. So again, fascinating directions, I think, for the future and the way that computers can be used to really add to that physical component of reconstructive and experimental archaeology.
It touched on things which were mentioned in Claire Walton's paper from Butzer on when they rebuild the new version of their Neolithic house, they're going to actually put up a board with several alternatives just to show that this isn't the one thing. It's not a fixed interpretation. It's actually one of multiple possibilities. And I thought the contrast between doing it on the computer and then showing it, but showing that there isn't just this possibility, that it's open to more possibilities, was a really good point. And in a way, Kate Shear's paper with the idea of giving shared authority to the visitor to engage them in just what would you put in her case, a virtual roundhouse, and having that discussion as part of visitor engagement was a really powerful way of going forward.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, it goes to that making it relevant. And Walton's paper, I think, was really juxtaposing that concept of reality versus concept versus ideas, and seeing whether the reality, the fixing of these versions of the past in the landscape at a museum could have a comparative with the experimental nature of research and multiple versions and testing. And she seemed to sort of indicate that these are things that can be done, that they are compatible and they work. They're actually complementary as well, which is great.
There are certainly things that we've seen visually that are a really good example of the phenomenon of synesthesia. In other words, you see them and your mouth starts watering. So some of the things that we've been shown, you have a sense that you're there, or you have a sense of, oh yes, that must taste or smell so good. And just playing on those virtual connections is something that I've been really interested in, and bringing, yes, do touch into a lot more of the traditional museum spectrum as well.
Absolutely. I think that's the way to go. And I think we have an audience now who are crying out for that, who want to be part of the museum. I think the popularity of TV programs about archaeology, since Time Team, etc., or even going back to the original Iron Age programs about the reconstruction of the Iron Age, I think that really shows that there's a genuine appetite in the general public to engage with museums and be part of the process.
Yes. And having that dialogue out front rather than pretending that we know all the answers is, I think, a really good way forward. Yeah.
Absolutely. That goes to the ethics, right? We have to be honest about what we're doing and being very forthright, in terms of what we do know, what we don't know, and what is supposition, theory, etc.
Yes, I've got various other points which I could make, but I'm also thinking we kind of had a sense throughout the conference that there are the standard archaeological materials. If we think of sort of clay, ceramics, stone, tool stone ornaments, organic plants, leather, textiles. The bark cloth was a great addition to that range. So many of those papers are coming as crossovers. So the loom weights in clay tell you something about the textiles that aren't so often found. And the wear traces, manufacturing traces, and all kinds of things on the bone and antler shell tools, the methods of extracting some of those using fire, and ways in which people were picking out what kinds of evidence you should look for if you wanted to see that at the archaeological quarry sites, whether it was for quartz or copper ore in America by Frenny, or some of the others. It was picking up things that if we look at them as experiments, they're at one level and they have a value, and at the other level, they're showing us what we might be missing and are part of the training up of archaeological eyes and specialists to spot some of these things and to be able to therefore protect them once they've been seen and noticed.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a really, really interesting point here, that it's about being holistic about our approach, right? And not being too narrowly focused on a specific area of technology, let's say, or reconstruction, whatever that thing is, and really understanding that each one of those objects, each one of those artifacts that we find are part of an assemblage of material, right? We use that term.
Yeah.
But it's part of a broader constellation of assemblages within a community and part of an ongoing changing societal behavior. So instead of, isolating these objects, which we have to do to really understand them, but we also really need to kind of step back and realize that everything is really connected as part of a broader human behavior.
Yes, absolutely. I think it's one of those where we look at a moment in time, and this moment in time is going to be captured now in this set of wonderful videos. It's also going to be part of a moment in time that will go down in history just because of the pandemic and the change. We're not going to go back to what we were doing before anyway. And so it's right there at this moment that you've got, if you like, a really strong lens focusing in on what's going on this wonderful diaspora of different ideas, different perspectives, using experiments to take archaeology as a whole and the study of the past into a new direction, and pushing forward some of the ways in which we try and communicate the results of our research.
That's a wonderful way to, I think, encapsulate the entirety of this conference, in that, yes, we do have this snapshot in time now that we would not have had this been a physical conference. And so, yes, let's really look positively at this experience. I could see that this could be a model for conferences going forward, even in a time outside COVID, outside pandemics, whereby the ability to bring everyone together from every single continent in the world to have a conversation, thousands of people to watch and experience this is a real, it's a milestone, I think.
It is, and I think, we've gone from Exarch, which has got its 20th birthday, and I feel like Exarch's really come of age. It grew in Europe, but it's really gone out into the wider world, and it's got these different traits and 4 legs which it rests on, and it's a very interesting place where they intersect. And if we think about the way that the world is going, then it makes me feel like we need more engagement practically, because it's something that we have valued even more because we have not had face-to-face contact. And the archaeological open air museums, those practical engagements, are really going to be treasured all the more when they open up again. And I do think that travel is a source of pollution, but it's also a source of inspiration. And the ways in which you can travel physically may not be as frequent. And I don't think they'll ever be as frequent as they were a year or two ago. But on the other hand, I think we still need them. And I think we will treasure them all the more because they are a bit rarer. And the hybrid world of traveling from our armchair using the computer screen will also have benefits. I'm very conscious that Air travel is expensive. Some of the papers in this conference could never have been pulled together if people also had to put airfares, hotel bills in there. And the help of people like the Wenner-Gren for promoting those keynote papers from different areas of the world, just bringing them into that sort of worldwide community of experimental archaeologists is, again, something that I think is a standout from this conference.
Absolutely. I don't think I could have said it better.
Well, I don't know about you, but I think what we should probably do now is think that unless you've got something else that is a burning thing you want to say, we should probably bring things to a close.
I think we should. I think we've kept everyone long enough. And
Okay, so if anybody would like to come to Exeter at some point in the future, we'd love to welcome you and see you in person. But I also think it's been great to meet so many of you online and to know that, yes, I really would like to meet you in person as well. And I would also like to say at this point that this has never been tried before. I don't know of another conference where some organization has decided to deal with multiple time zones and take people on a global tour and basically compromise their ability to sleep over several days and have a field of volunteers making that wizardry work. And so I think my ending really is, I think EXARC has really set a new idea of what you can do. And it's not one that I've seen done in any field, let alone in our archaeological field. I don't know of where else this has happened. And I just commend them for having the vision to do it this way and to give us this set of experiences with so much organization and support behind the scenes. And it's like one of those beautiful swans on the river. You know, I'm quite sure that elegant appearance has had sort of a moment or two where the feet have been going underneath the surface double time. So I'd just like to thank everybody who has been a volunteer or an organizer who's helped with all aspects, including all of the captioning, which is another huge benefit of doing it this way. Phenomenal amount of work from the EXARC body and secretariat. And I think the whole organization is really to be thanked profoundly for doing things a new way and having the vision to see that as a possibility. And taking that agenda forward into the next conference is going to be the next challenge to rise to.
yeah, absolutely. I think the success of this conference it's going to be hard to match. And so, yes, we will have to rise to that challenge.
So in this closing address, Peter and I just want to say how much we've enjoyed things. And I've actually really enjoyed the conversations we've had throughout the conference with each other, where we've been batting these ideas around. And in my close, I want to say welcome to all of you to this online world, but also let's take the agendas raised here forward into the next EXARC conference to be held physically in Butser, but with tentacles wrapping itself around the world now and looking at sustainability and issues that can be explored, making experimental archaeology relevant to the present.
Absolutely. Thank you, Linda. I think, yes, relevancy is really the point here, keeping EXARC relevant, getting more people involved. And I think this conference has really shown that is a genuine possibility for the future and something we can really build on. So yes, thank you, Linda. Thank you, University of Exeter, Wenner-Gren for making this possible, and to everyone who participated, took part, or made it happen. Thank you all.
Thank you.